Thank you for joining us today. We've got a really interesting guest today that I met at a party for the Dallas Earth Expo, which is a fantastic yearly event that gives you an opportunity to learn how you can change your life into a more environmentally friendly and sustainable way. So we're going to have a chance to visit with Zak Shelton today. Glad to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much, David. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. So what brought you to EarthX party?
You know, so that was an EarthX Mexico party, and so that was just kind of launched later this year, and they threw their first event in Mexico City in November. I've been on the advisory council for EarthX Film, which is the film festival that that supports and is part of EarthX. So EarthX, some of your viewers may not know, but like you mentioned, it's a sustainable environmental experience, and it's the largest in the world. In April, it was formerly Earth Day Texas, and so, you know, I started going to EarthX or Earth Day Texas, and how I got plugged in was I have a friend who's a chef, and his wife was working, and we just was working with the organization. That was one kind of entry point, and then I used to own an events company, and we threw like high-end vegan dining experiences, and that kind of caught wind in the sustainability community in Dallas, and they asked us to be on board. And it's just an incredible project. Like I said, it's the largest one in the world, so just being involved with it. And then, of course, being involved on the film side of things is really a lot of fun. We bring in filmmakers from all over the world to show their films at EarthX. It really gives them an amazing platform. So just being a part of that, and you know, I was mentioning to you on Friday how incredible Dallas is to be a place to kind of be a part of this particular movement, the sustainability movement.
Well, and people don't think of Dallas as a real environmentally savvy place, but
Right.
There's a lot of people that are dynamic, that have resources, that have really thrown a lot of energy behind this. And it's a great event to go to down at the State Fair.
Mm-hmm.
Takes up a bunch of the buildings. There's exhibits, and then there's conferences and talks.
Oh, it's
and
incredible.
then films. I mean, it's a multi-day event, free to the public.
That's right.
So.
That's right. And you can find out all of the information by, you know, Googling EarthX in Dallas. It's at the end of April, and like we're just so excited to be able to bring that message to a place where most people don't think, you know, is well, this is the land of oil and cattle. You know, which is, Dallas has such a rich and amazing history. And I think that because the rich and amazing history is founded on oil and cattle, most people don't equate those two things with sustainability. But you know firsthand from being a rancher that that doesn't have to necessarily be the case. So I think that this is one of the best places, if not the best place, to have a foundation and a pillar of the movement be experienced here in Dallas, and then kind of being able to spread that.
One of the things I think that's positive about EarthX is that it's not so adversarial to the standard way of living. It's not trying to say everybody needs to go back to a hut and live in a yurt out in the
or ride a bicycle down the highway, or whatever the case may be. No, I agree. And one of the things that's really important about a movement that is seeking to change, culturally speaking, the way that people do things from an everyday aspect, right? Making sure that you're recycling, making sure that you're not using too much water, or all the way to the consumer end of things, making sure that when you do go to the grocery store that you're buying things that are low waste, zero waste, sustainable, making really informed decisions as a consumer. You can do that and not have to change who you are. And so when we're focused on not being adversarial, right, that everybody has a seat at the table. We want to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table. We want to make sure that everyone's included. You can sit with us. It's that kind of movement. You don't have to be. There's no point in being adversarial or militaristic, or and I
Well,
feel
it's
that
counterproductive.
it's 100% counterproductive.
I mean, when you alienate people and get their arms up, get the fists up,
That's right.
you've lost the battle. There's no way you can network with people in an adversarial position. And, as I like to say, you can love your neighbor as yourself through acts of charity and kindness, but you can also do it through your work and your everyday life, and serve as an example to people of the really positive things that being a Christian is all about. It's not about being judgmental. It's not about being arrogant and saying, I'm going to heaven and you're going to hell. It's about showing love on a daily basis, joyfully and happily, without expectation of a huge return back to you. But you will find that if you're good to people and you love people and care for people, that they are going to respond positively to you. And that's one thing that EarthX has done, is they haven't been fists up, by God, you've got to move to your yurt. It's all about small incremental steps we can make, and thinking about the bigger picture, and trying to work in a reasonable way.
Absolutely, and in a way that that is cooperative and collaborative. And I came to EarthX through the work that I do, right? I was noticed as, I work in the same way. So I grew up on a cattle ranch. But what's interesting is I've been vegan now for, almost 8 years, right? So, but I still am, and it's for health reasons, it's for environmental reasons, but I growing up on a ranch and still, like, my grandfather still has a ranch, and I've learned the hard way that being a part of any type of movement is sitting down with people and having conversations. And I think the clearest picture of the wrong way to do this has got to be, the political climate in the U.S. right now as being so incredibly polarized. And so, without getting into those politics, just understanding that that's the case, that there is a polarization that's taken place.
People can't work together.
People can't work together, and then things don't get done, and that affects the folks who need the work done for them, and that affects you and I as taxpayers of the people that this thing's supposed to be working for. So that's kind of like a broad, the biggest kind of zoomed out picture, or maybe not necessarily zoomed out, but that's an absolutely the most epitomized version of what you and I are talking about. And so one of the things that's really paramount in moving forward and getting things done is the ability to compromise, the ability to show love and compassion. And when I think of Christ, love and compassion are the two words that come to mind immediately.
Well, they're really paramount, and there are so many supposed followers of Christ that really get off into an incredible adversarial mindset, incredible judgmental, and
isn't that
it really stalls out. And I think it's one reason why the church struggles in the modern world, because it doesn't let Christ's love shine through, which should be the focus,
right,
of following Christ. And,
absolutely.
So.
Well, I grew up in not a terribly legalistic Christian household, but where the ideals and the image was more important than the teachings and the lessons. And I think as I moved into a space or an arena where there was a lot of stigma and taboo, as a vegan, when you walk into a place, typically there's a taboo. Typically there's some sort of stigma. And I think it's so incredibly parallel to this idea that we're talking about. I think that the Christian faith and followers of Christ get a really bad rap a lot of times because there's this idea of holier than thou, and there's this idea of what you were mentioning, like I'm going this place, you're going that place, when really when you have conversations with people and you start to realize that the ideals are the same, the principles are the same, the values are the same, if you can extract those things, if you can realize that two people, a vegan and a cattle rancher, right, have really similar ideals and really similar values, then you can really start to move forward in a way that helps everyone. And alienating people and not being able to sit at the table with people and not being able to extract those ideals and those values and those morals and find what's similar rather than what's different. Because when you focus on what's different, that's where that adversarial comes into.
Well, and just like some Christians who get very judgmental and very hostile towards non-Christians, you know, some people in alternative diet groups get very involved in lambasting people who use animals for food.
It's very unfortunate, because what's happening is, and being on the inside, I like to use that term because I grew up on a cattle ranch and my whole family's cattle ranchers. Being on the inside, what happens is when you say those things or you make those implications, what that person feels is that you're implying that the way that my mother and father raised me, the way that their mother and father raised them, our entire livelihood is based on some terrible things that you're saying. And so I've always found that being able to have that conversation in a way that doesn't make those implications. Like I want to sit down with everyone. I want to make friends with everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I transitioned from being a traditional rancher that sold calves into the commercial feedlot industry where the cattle, you know, left my ranch and went into a feedlot environment and were fed out till they were ready to be slaughtered, to doing a grass-fed operation.
Okay.
Where my calves never went on a truck or a trailer, lived their life on the ranch, eating quality forage, being treated very well, and living a great life. For a long time, I let my animals live an extra year.
Wow.
So they had a really quality experience. We were producing fantastic meat. And it was being sold at local yokel in McKinney, and people were loving it.
Yeah.
And it was really a great thing. And I really encourage people to eat grass-fed. And, you know, I am a meat eater, and I think we need to encourage people to move away from the cheap commodity meat and reward people who are raising cattle on grass and selling them locally in the environment, eliminating the long truck rides and all the sickness and problems that come from concentrating animals and stressing them out. So we had almost no disease, no cattle die, and a very harmonious environment because we created a really positive environment for the cattle. So I hope that when you think about making your choice of food, if you are buying meat, look for grass-fed, both in beef and in chicken. The grass-fed chicken is just, pastured chicken is just outstanding.
Yeah.
Really a refreshing change, much better texture.
Is it?
Oh man, I mean, it is just.
Well, it's funny because I haven't eaten meat in, let's see, like 8+ years. But growing up on a ranch, I understand these things. And
you'd eat farm-raised beef. People
absolutely.
They'd slaughter a calf, and that would be the family food.
Well, and it wasn't necessarily so much in my case because I had a similar, we had a similar operation. But what is the point that you've made, and that goes back to what I was saying, was what you've identified as this massive problem, factory farming, right? And if we think about that from an environmental aspect, the carbon footprint, the waste, the ocean dead zones, the incredible amount of land that's being used to graze cattle at unbelievable amounts that could be potentially used for growing the oats and the soy and the grains that we use to feed cattle, we can feed humans with. So there's, but see what's happening is, in this exact conversation is what we were talking about, which you and I have identified a similar issue that needs to be solved, even though on the surface it would seem like we sit on the opposite end of the table. But understanding, coming together, sitting on the same side and looking, what are the biggest problems that need to be solved right now? I can say 100% confidently as a vegan, the biggest problem that needs to be solved right now is factory farming. And so being able to sit down at the table with the rancher, and how can we come up with real actionable items? And one of those things is, we could probably all agree that deciding to eat less meat, even if you are going to eat meat, and then when you do eat meat, making sure that it comes from sources that, that we would say are more responsible. And that solves that issue, right? It's an issue that we can see so many problems come from. But it's not to say that there's no room at the table for everyone to come in, that you and I are in some way enemies. And it's the same way with the Christian faith, right? As if someone who's doing something that is not in line with teaching. And just to be 100% clear, I grew up Christian. I'm not sure where I stand at this point, but I do know that when I look at the stories of Jesus and I look at Jesus' life, the messages of love and compassion are the only thing.
They're great ways to live.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't believe Jesus was the Son of God, even if you don't believe that there's a heaven and a hell, even if you think you're just going to die and rot in the ground, or die and be embalmed in the ground, or be burned up in a cremation,
Sure.
and that's the end of your life. There is no soul.
Mm-hmm.
There is no judgment day. There is nothing. Jesus' teachings to love your neighbors yourself and be at peace in the world are good, solid rules to live by.
Amen.
Amen.
And
God, if we just had more love in the world and less selfishness and less rapaciousness and less embracing of evil, what a lovely place we would have to be in.
I agree 100%.
Likewise, if we really embrace sustainability in agriculture and preserving the topsoil, enriching the topsoil, and of course I'm a believer that animals are a great way to enrich the topsoil. Properly done, grazing cattle actually incorporates organic matter back in the soil. Their manure is incredible fertilizer. So
can't argue with that.
There's some really positive things, but I'd love for us to see milk and beef prices be high enough that a guy didn't need to go to 5,000 a head, who could make a good living off 100 head of cattle, know them by name, treat them like family, and really have a different standard of activity. But the problem is, our government and our society loves cheap food.
Subsidies, right?
And an encouragement to encourage people to get big, go for the low-cost dollar, put everything on
Absolutely.
the futures exchange, beat the price down.
Yep. So much of it does take place in Wall Street, but one of the things that we know is that if we continue to eat beef at the rate that we're eating, but then at the same time encourage grass-fed and more acreage per head of cattle, there's not enough land.
But there is a lot of land that's only good for cattle grazing.
Right. That's absolutely. But I'm saying, if we were to stay at the same rate of beef consumption, and then also switch all of the factory farms to free-range grass-fed.
But see, the typical ranch does not practice sound grass management. They have a big pasture, and they put the cows in there and leave them in there. The cattle kill the good grass.
Right, overgrazing.
Overgraze the good grass. They leave the weeds. They leave the grass that's less desirable. And so you have a degradation of pasture.
Absolutely.
If you look at New Zealand You look at what kind of stocking rates they run. They graze rotationally, where the cattle are very intensive in grazing one spot for one day, and then the next day they move to a new spot.
Right.
So the grass has a month to recover and rejuvenate itself.
Yeah.
Instead of just being stomped and chewed. There's nothing worse for grass than to be gnawed down to the ground.
Right. Because then
No leaf structure.
Yep.
It can't do photosynthesis. It has to use its root energy to put a new shoot
Right.
up to graze, to
Right.
produce grass.
Yeah.
Whereas if you graze the grass down selectively, it regrows fast. It's like
Yeah.
your yard.
Yeah.
You don't
Of
scalp.
course.
You don't scalp your yard down to bare dirt. You cut the grass, and it grows back in a week's time.
Yeah.
It's time to mow again.
Yeah.
Well, that's how rotational grazing
Absolutely.
works. That's how the buffalo grazed the Native American pasture. They would go across it,
Yeah.
not even stopping between bites.
Right.
They would eat and move, eat
Yep.
and move. And that's what you find when you do intensive grazing, rotational grazing. The cattle just go whoosh across it, and then they're ready to move to the next pasture.
And, yeah.
So that technology, that way of management has the possibility to double or triple or quadruple the carrying capacity of existing rangeland, which is only suitable for rangeland.
Right.
in
Right.
term- And there is so many acres now of land that is laying empty and fallow because cattle prices are low, cattle raising is marginal, especially on a small scale.
Right.
And so, you know, even if we really wanted to be environmentally friendly,
Right.
we would harvest all our yard clippings and feed them to cattle.
Yeah. Well,
We
and
would have a dairy right in Dallas, and all the grass clippings would come to that dairy because here we are fertilizing lawns excessively.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to have all this green grass.
Beautiful
It's
green,
incredible
thick,
quality
yeah.
feed
Yeah.
that's just going to waste.
Absolutely.
It could be composted, it could be run through cattle, and then the manure could be composted
Yeah.
to enrich soil. I mean, there is just some really innovative win-win things that can be done
Absolutely.
if we really focus on sustainability.
Yeah, if we were to focus on the bigger picture and how it all works together, I think it is worth noting that one of the reasons that New Zealand is so good at this is because their rate of consumption is still lower. They have the
Well, they export like crazy.
and they have the consumption to be able to manage that. The problem is, like you were mentioning earlier, people eating the $1 cheeseburgers 2-3 times a day. Like the rate at which we're consuming beef is just as much of the problem as the way in which we
Wow.
raise them. And so I think 20, 30, 50 years ago, we were eating a fraction of the beef that we're eating.
Oh, I think people were eating, I mean, the traditional diet was heavy in animal proteins.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a group called the Weston A. Price Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting food foundation, nonprofit, that teaches about the transition away from white flour and white sugar,
Yeah.
which is really the health disaster.
Interesting.
In terms of beef is not a health disaster. White flour and white sugar are absolute destroyers. Weston A. Price was founded in the honor of a dentist that went around the world because he was so interested in the facial structure.
Yeah.
He took pictures of people around the world before and after they adopted a Western white flour, white sugar diet.
Right.
He went to see native people living in the jungle, living their natural diet, which was heavy in animal proteins and other things, but no sugar, no flour.
Right.
Beautiful teeth, beautiful faces,
Yeah.
filled out, good bone
Yeah.
structure. See them, you go into the city where they've moved in and adopted those rotted teeth, caved in faces because the bones in the face were eroded.
Yeah.
Incredible evidence
Yeah.
of the change from eating a rich diet free of sugar and
Yeah.
white flour and going to the
Yeah.
white flour, the biscuits and the sweets and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that so interesting? And I think
And
a
then
lot.
some people who are some people who are vegetarian eat white flour and sugar.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
A lot of it. I mean, I've seen vegan or vegetarian people that are kind of pudgy because they
I'm not saying that that's the only way to be healthy, for sure. I'm not necessarily saying, well, I do think that there's tremendous amount of evidence that the healthiest civilizations in the world were plant-based, and we can get into that. But what I'm not saying is that just because you adopt a vegan lifestyle for whatever reason means that you're going to be healthy, because I know for a fact that I can drive about 15 minutes up the road and get the best cupcake in the world, and it happens to be vegan, and I eat a dozen of them, and that doesn't make me healthy, right?
Right.
So 100%, just because it's vegan doesn't make it more healthier. But we all, I think we can agree that one solution to many of the health epidemics that are potentially plaguing even the American health system is we could that is part of it, but we all know that it would probably benefit us to eat a little bit more fruits and vegetables, right? So if we apply that idea,
if they're grown well, the problem.
Well, that's absolutely true, 100%. I couldn't agree more that the same issues that we have with beef being grown improperly is the same issues that we have with non-organic and pesticide heavy. It has to do with consumption rates, right?
Well,
so,
I think one thing you can see from this show, if you've seen anything, is that two people who are coming from some different life perspectives can get along and have a productive,
100%.
Happy conversation. And that's really what I would encourage you to do. You know, don't be afraid to talk to somebody who's got a radically different viewpoint than you. Try to understand where they're coming from. Try to find common ground and live in peace and harmony. And, you know, as a rancher and an avid beef eater, I could go on my platform about how it's the most wonderful thing in the world. And but it's important to have a dialogue and not be too preachy, although I tend to be preachy on the show. I hope you all have learned something from this show. Come to EarthX next April, and I think you'll be enlightened. It's got a broad spectrum of viewpoints. Have a very Merry Christmas and a very happy time. Let Christ's love shine through your actions and words in the world, doing that second commandment. Have a great day. Look forward to seeing you again on the show.